Hey, this is Jay Watts from Merely Human Ministries. Welcome to the Human Things Podcast, Season 3. We believe this is Episode 8. We're just not sure. That's the kind of outfit we run here. Episode 8 is what we think.
3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Last episode, we talked about the political platforms. Before we get into abortion this week or value of human life or questions on that front, usually I like to start off with something different, something where we talk about maybe cultural things. A lot of times we talk about animals. I love animals. I think we could have talked about the fact that I thought the most overhyped story this week was that raccoons think Tesla Cybertrucks look like dumpsters. It was born out of a particular woman who was camping, and when she had food stored, and they call it the vault, I guess, on the Cybertruck. It's not actually just the truck bed. They call it the vault because they're trying to be fancy, I guess. Let me be clear. I don't have anything against the Cybertruck. I don't have anything for it either. I'm not one of those people that's animated about this issue or about Elon Musk for the most part. I see all the time. Instagram, I'm trying not to be on social media anymore because I find it just a soul-destroying realm. But I do get on and check Instagram more for lacrosse news. That's actually what I get on Instagram more for anything is I check lacrosse news. I get my actual news elsewhere. But because I have kids, all of my children have played lacrosse. One of them is still actively playing lacrosse. So I get on there to check out lacrosse news. And Instagram really, really, really wants me to get involved with threads. And so it shows me threads. And every once in a while I look. And whatever my curiosity with threads is, here's what my experience of threads has been. There's things that people on threads hate. Elon Musk and Donald Trump are the top of that list. Obviously Elon Musk, because threads was a counter movement to X, which used to be Twitter, which is now owned by Elon Musk. And so they get on and just talk about how much they hate Elon Musk, hate Donald Trump. Other things that people hate on threads that I find weird, Zack Snyder movies. They're very harsh about Zack Snyder. It's J.K. Rowling. They hate J.K. Rowling a lot on threads, post a lot about what an evil TERF she is, trans exclusionary reactionary feminist. Is that right? Yes, I think that's right. But so she hates trans people is what they say, which she says, I don't hate trans people. They're just not women. Trans women are just not women. And that's her big issue. So they hate Jordan Peterson on threads. They talk about him a lot. But more J.K. Rowling and Zack Snyder movies. They really, really seem to hate them. And so here's why I think this story got overblown, because nobody is more happy with the apparent lack of success of the Cybertruck than the people on threads. They celebrate this daily. And so this one incident where raccoons tried to break into a Cybertruck to steal food became a headline that came across my social media multiple times telling me that raccoons, plural, like all over the world, are mistaking Cybertrucks for dumpsters and trying to break into them, which I actually thought was a great story. And I was really excited to talk about that, to share that. And the more I looked into it, the more I found out one particular raccoon tried to break into the vault, whatever that is, on one particular Cybertruck. And then the rest of it just got blown up because people have passionate feelings about Elon Musk and anything that has to do with the Cybertruck. And they just want to mock and make fun of it. So there's that. Another thing that happened in the last week is the opening ceremonies for the Olympics, which featured, I was doing other things when it happened. I'm just not that big a fan of the Olympics anymore. I used to be. I was a swimmer when I was younger, so I used to hang on swimming. I got to be honest. I have trouble finding sports now, because it used to be you just turned on the TV and there was a channel and sports were on that channel, right? So the Olympics were on NBC. You turn on NBC, you watch sports. I don't have NBC on the streaming service that I have, so I'd have to go buy a streaming service to watch it. Or I don't know, maybe they're offering on Peacock for sure. Now, I'm happy to tell you that there have been multiple articles written about how I'm not just the only person that has trouble with this. Sports broadcasting is a mess right now. It's difficult to figure out with all the different contracts, who's streaming what, where, and actually all of the people who own the sports content have been negotiating behind the scenes for about a year now, I think, to try to come up with a sports platform, a streaming service where they cooperate so that people can just watch sports again and not have to search out who has it and where can they watch it and from where can they watch it. So all that to say, I just wasn't watching it because I was doing other things. And then my social media feed became fascinating because at first it was the opening ceremonies were blasphemous because they were making fun of the Last Supper with trans and LGBT community, and some weird blue Dionysus who was giving the peace symbol. I don't know. I didn't watch it. All sounds weird to me. I mean, of course I saw sort of the videos that people were posting, but I never watched it in context of anything that was going on. It seemed really, really obvious to me that it was the Last Supper though, because not just the arrangement of the table, but because the woman at the center had this mock holy halo over her head. Then the next thing that comes on my social media feed after all the blasphemy posts is all of the people who come in and they're saying, you ignorant Christians, you ignorant hillbilly hicks. This wasn't the Last Supper. This was a bacchanalian feast, and it was an entirely different painting that was being used here. And only because you're easily offended Christian hicks, losers, rednecks, did you think it was, you're so uneducated, multiple posts of mine, so uneducated. If only you had gone to school instead of being homeschooled or been schooled in your church. Which I have to be honest with you, I've said that a couple of times, and that makes me sound like I'm dishonest on normal case. I'm going to stop saying that. I'll say this. I never fully understood what gaslighting was until this last week. People would all the time accuse people of gaslighting, and I would question. I'm not sure I fully understand it. I fully understand what gaslighting is right now because, and what was fascinating about the you ignorant Christians was oftentimes that post was signed or headed by, I'm a Christian pastor. I'm a Baptist pastor. I am a Christian author, and I'm embarrassed that Christians thought that this was the Last Supper when it is so obviously a bacchanalian feast and you people are just idiots. And this was, by the way, fed by the guy's name is Jolly. His last name is Jolly. He was the artistic director of both the opening ceremonies and the closing ceremonies, where he came out in this sort of pseudo apology and said, I didn't mean to offend anybody. This wasn't the Last Supper, except then the next group comes back and says, gaslighting. Look at the program that was released for this portion of the opening ceremonies, and it says it's the Last Supper on the sand. That's the name of the section. So then I understood for the first time in my life what gaslighting was. I get it. I understand it now. Because whether you're upset or not, and by the way, I'm not because I don't think it's an insult to Christianity. I'm not upset because neo-pagans are going to neo-pagan. That's what they're going to do. That's just who and what they are. They're going to find any reason to do, and talk about this is supposed to be inclusive. We wanted this to be inclusive of everybody. So, and to be inclusive, in order to be inclusive, we put together a bunch of transsexuals and LGBT people in the community, put them at a mockery of the Last Supper, and then had Dionysus hanging out with, I don't know what he was supposed to be wearing, and it painted blue and giving the peace symbol. Right. You thought that was going to be inclusive. That's a problem that you live in a bubble, my friend. You live in a bubble where everybody agrees with you if you didn't think that what you were doing there was going to light a fire under a lot of people. When you're talking about Christians that are offended by this, we're talking about not just some people, billions of people who hold their faith close to them. We're talking about more than 1 billion people worldwide who follow this faith. It's the most important part of their identity and how they understand themselves. And they felt like they were being insulted in the opening ceremonies. If it was not his intention to insult, well done, sir. I mean, you just, that was remarkably stupid. I mean, almost miraculously idiotic. But again, I'm not offended. I just learned what gaslighting was because I thought it was fascinating to see the charge thrown back at everybody. You're the idiot because you thought it was the Last Supper. They said it was the Last Supper. And then they went on to say, well, you shouldn't be so easily offended, or the Last Supper is not the Bible, or it's not Jesus that was being made fun of there. It was just used as a reference. And there's been so many references to it. The Simpsons have made fun of The Last Supper. They started listing off all of the different shows that have made fun of it. Again, that happened this week. It really doesn't interest me a whole lot other than what we've talked about it already. Although it was very instructive for me because now, for the first time in my life, I feel like I genuinely understand what gaslighting is. I have no idea why that was so hard for me to learn, but now I get it. Because when people went from blasphemy to you're idiots, signed your Christian friend, to gaslighting, I said, I got it now. I understand. They're blaming me for being offended by the silly thing that they did. Again, my take on this is neo-pagans are going to neo-pagan. That's just what they're going to do. They're going to act like that every chance they get. I'm not deeply offended by it, but I haven't seen it. I didn't watch it. I didn't have my family all sitting around. And the Olympics have basically become fairly meaningless to me in my adult life. So I just had no emotional investment in this. I do understand what it must have been like for a family that was sitting down, gathered together, wanting to enjoy an important global communal event, and then to have their faith mocked and made fun of in a way that would not have been allowed with any other faith. Let's be clear about that. So raccoons are not attacking Cybertrucks. One raccoon, it seems, attacked one Cybertruck. The opening ceremony was hijacked by neo-pagans with a message of inclusivity that they mistakenly thought was going to be received warmly across the world because they don't have the slightest idea, apparently, how Christians receive being made fun of. And that leads us to the election. I talked last time about platforms. And today I said I wanted to talk about what does candidate Vice President Kamala Harris believe about the issue of abortion. So that's going to be today. Again, hopefully we're going to hit this short and sweet. We're going to go as deep as is necessary to just hit major points. I'm going to provide links. I'm going to send you links or someone links. I'm going to send Shannon links because you don't need any links at all. But Shannon needs links. I'm going to send Shannon links so that we can have all of this stuff underneath supported by what we talk about over the next period here. So Kamala Harris and abortion. Because the case I made last time that was made to me by a friend in politics and knows more about this issue than I do is that you are not voting for the person, you're voting for the platform. The platform wins all the time. But when we're talking about presidential politics, the presidential candidates themselves have a lot of input into the platform. We talked about how Donald Trump has moved the Republican platform away from its traditional position of being very strongly and very explicitly pro-life to it now being a sort of a tip of the hat towards the idea that human life has value and that abortion can be restricted but isn't required to be restricted, is now a state's issue, not a federal issue. And we need to protect IVF and birth control. So that was where he ended up on it. So first of all, let's start by this. I'm going to read President Biden's existing copy of the platform that he was taking into this prior to him stepping down, which we didn't even talk about. It's completely outrageous that they had a candidate that was losing and they removed him from the ticket and put somebody else on that they thought would poll better. And then they accuse their enemies of not being democratic and how they operate. That is the exact opposite of how a democratic republic should work. We don't like the fact that our candidate didn't look well. How late in the process are we allowed to do this going forward? At what point can we say our candidate's not polling well? Sure, we elected him to be our candidate. Sure, we voted for him. Sure, the country chose him. He was picked in a democratic process, which, by the way, is nonsense anyway, because the Democratic Party has cheated in every one of their primary seasons. First, it was to make sure Bernie Sanders didn't upset the cart with Hillary Clinton coming up. Then it was to make sure that Bernie Sanders again didn't upset Joe Biden in his bid for presidency. And then this time, they had no primary process because the president-elect was going to be the party representative. And so he just won unopposed for the most part. I mean, there was some opposition, but it wasn't serious. And then he got the position and he realized that this guy isn't going to win. So let's remove him and put somebody else in and see if we can win with that person. 3 election processes, 2 Democratic primary processes and now going into the general election prior to the Democratic convention. 3 times they have interfered with the Democratic process to make sure they got the results that they wanted and the candidate they wanted. They have no right to ever lecture any political group anywhere about circumventing or subverting the democratic process. They don't care about it at all. They circumvent it and undermine it every chance they get to make sure they get the results that they want. And in this particular case, they realized they had a bad candidate, not unfit for, if he's unfit for office, he needs to leave now. If that was their determination, he's unfit for office and he needs to leave now, and Vice President Kamala Harris becomes the first woman president of the United States immediately. But they said, we don't think he can win a second election. He had the worst, as we've already talked about this show, the worst debate performance in history. And so we remove him and put somebody we like better in there. That's just outrageously undemocratic. But here we are. Here's Joe Biden's platform on abortion. President Biden and Vice President Harris and the Democrats are committed to restoring the reproductive rights Trump ripped away, and will pass a law codifying the protections of Roe, strengthen access to contraception, protect a woman's right to access IVF, and support access to FDA-approved medication abortion. Well over half the abortions that are done in the United States are done as medication abortions or chemical abortions. That is the preferred way to get abortions in the United States right now, and it's only going to grow. It's the easiest. During the COVID, we changed laws so that it could be mailed to people. It could be prescribed to people easier. They could get it easier without a doctor having to be there and to see them in person. And those laws were not pulled back. They still exist. Everything has been moving forward since COVID to make it much easier to disseminate the drugs necessary to get a medical or chemical abortion. So that's the Democratic platform. But let's look at candidate Harris. I have 2 videos I want to play first before we talk about it so that we can get a handle on her, because I said last time she is more a full-throated advocate of abortion than Joe Biden ever could be. He always had to pay lip service to his Catholic background, saying, look, I'm privately pro-life. My Catholic position is pro-life, but I'm publicly pro-choice because I think that we shouldn't be interfering in the lives of other people. There was always the semblance of a tortured individual over this, and he's changed his position in the past on this. So first, let's get it from the candidate's mouth.
Vice President Kamala Harris today became the first sitting vice president or president to visit an abortion clinic. The Biden campaign hopes that by putting reproductive rights front and center this election cycle, it'll motivate voters to go to the polls. CBS's Nancy Cordes reports tonight from Minnesota.
The reporter said, well, you've made history, I guess, again, because, I did. But
the vice president made history with a half-hour private tour of an unassuming spot, a Planned Parenthood clinic in St. Paul.
the reason I'm here is because this is a healthcare crisis.
The clinic has seen a 25% surge in abortions since 2 neighboring states, along with several others, enacted full abortion bans.
And doctor, please.
Dr. Sarah Traxler is the chief medical officer.
Our new abortion landscape is difficult. It is dangerous, and it is putting my patients and healthcare providers at severe risk.
The visit was the last stop for the VP in a 6-state swing that has been solely focused on reproductive rights.
These extremists, they're trying to take women back to the 1800s. We must restore the protections of Roe.
The issue is a top focus for the Biden campaign, and here's why. 57% of Americans say the overturning of Roe v. Wade nearly 2 years ago was mostly bad for the country.
Yeah,
Minnesota governor.
There. So I've talked about this not just on this podcast, but another podcast. Abortion is a popular issue right now for the Democratic Party. The vote coming out of Dobbs versus Jackson has gone their way. People were uncomfortable. And this happens. the general population, you have people who are committed, people like me who are committed to the principle that life ought to be treated with dignity and respect from the moment it comes into existence. And I think abortion is evil. You have people on the other side that believe with all of their heart that abortion is good all the time. Under every circumstances, a woman ought to have the choice to get an abortion all the way through pregnancy. And we'll talk about some of those people later on. That's not an exaggeration. And then you have the general population who exists somewhere between those 2 points. And sometimes they're comfortable with the pro-life people, and sometimes they're comfortable with the pro-choice people. Most of the time, they seem to feel conflicted between the two sides. When one side gets everything they want, generally speaking, they swing back the other way to balance it. So Roe v. Wade falls, Dobbs versus Jackson falls because President Trump was elected into office saying he was going to replace judges with people that would overturn Roe. He got into office. He did exactly what he said he was going to do. They did exactly what they were sent there to do. And then people said, whoa, that's a bit much. And so now they've run the other way. It'll sway back. They just do this. This is how it goes. The other side would like to believe that the whole world is constantly liberalizing on this issue. It's not the case. They swing back and forth on this based on how they feel. And so, which is not unusual for our current culture. Emotion has a lot to do with how we think and process and work our way through things. We're not a morally reflective group of people. For the large part, we're a very emotional, reactive group of people as far as a culture goes. So that's the first one. She is committed to restoring Roe. That was the name of her speaking tour, Restoring Roe. And she is the first sitting vice president to visit abortion clinics. I'm not really fond of the term abortion clinic. You're not really helping anybody in the sense like you're treating someone who's sick. You're professionally ending pregnancy by destroying a nascent human life. Now, I don't care whether you're pro-abortion or pro-life. That's true. I don't care if you're an abortion advocate or you're an anti-abortion advocate. What I just said is true. You are a facility that professionally operates to end pregnancy by the intentional destruction of nascent human life. You're not treating people with illnesses. You're treating pregnancy, the means by which all human life is reproduced throughout all of human history, as if it were an illness. That's the healthcare crisis that doctor mentioned in that video. Let's be clear. The crisis is people are at risk for having children. Horrifying. Now, the abortion advocate's going to get mad right now. So of course, because they're children they don't want to have. And those children, if they're born, are going to put restrictions on their ability to live the life the way they want. May even make them poorer than they were prior to that child being born. By the way, I am not poorer. Even though I have less money than I would have for having 3 kids, my life is much richer because it is less about me and more about family and community and investing in the lives of other human beings. So I reject this idea that all wealth and prosperity has to be tied up into my bank balance. And you may work harder. It's been our experience here. We have been a part of First Care Women's Clinic for years. And it's been my experience when you see people who come in, and it's First Care Women's Clinic is one of those evil pregnancy centers that you hear about where we trick people into having babies and we don't care about them after they're born. I mean, we give them, up to 4 years of support and food and baby needs and educate their parents on how to raise them and try to help them to take care of their finances better and to give them classes about how to break out of the lifestyle that they're living that got them to our doors in the first place, and willing to give the mother work in the sense of, or give her clothing to help her to find work. And in different times, we work with organizations to house them when they're in trouble and need a place to stay. And just in general, follow up and check up with these people and make sure that they know that they're loved and they have support if they want to make a life-affirming decision. But I mean, other than that, we don't care at all about them until they're, when they're born, we don't care. All of that stuff, all those things that we do for families after their child is born, rank trickery. We're just trying to deceive them by loving them in the community, pouring resources into their lives to tell them that they are. But here has been my experience, right? And JD's been a part of this as well. People will do for their children things that they won't do for themselves. People whose lives are a mess when they find themselves pregnant and then decide to have that child. Oftentimes when we are looking at them, dealing with them, or a part of our organization, we recognize that they are capable of making more mature decisions about their life and the way that they want to live because they're no longer just living for themselves. I remember Lorie Parker, our former executive director. I was trying to remember what we called them at First Care. Our former executive director, genius of a woman, gave her heart and spirit to this organization for decades. She and I were talking one time, and she said, in a counseling room, if you have somebody in front of you that talks about their life and what they're not willing to do, she said, I oftentimes ask them, do you have a little sister? And if they do say yes, she said, what would you want for them? Because she said these people are in a spiral or a cycle of self-hate or self-loathing. And they don't want for themselves because they don't believe that they are worthy of a happy ending or a renewed life. But if you can connect them with someone that they do care about and say, not what would you want for yourself, but what would you want for them? That they often want more for the people that they love than they want for themselves. And then she would ask them, then why don't you want that for yourself? It has been my experience that people will do for their children what they are not willing to do for themselves. And I would say I'm included in that. I am a more productive member of society for having kids because without kids, I was more adrift. There just was no reason for me to worry too much about my role or position in the world around me. But when I got married and we had kids, there was just, I had to participate in a different way because I wanted to make sure my kids had every opportunity to live the life they wanted to live. So when they say a crisis, a healthcare crisis, a crisis of children being born that will require we care about them. Horrifying. Yes. And I reject the idea that even if they cost me a little bit more financially, at the end, I won't be a better person for having had them in my life. All right. So that's what we're talking about, Restore Roe. Let's go on to, again, I mentioned earlier that Joe Biden has a tendency to struggle with the religious aspect. We've got a video of Kamala Harris talking about that as well, being religious and abortion.
One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do with her body. If she chooses, she will talk with her priest, her pastor, her rabbi, her imam, but it should not be the government telling her what to do. And that's all I believe that is really required. We are not asking anyone to abandon their personal beliefs. Right. It's just that the government should not, and in this year of our Lord 2024, the government should not be telling women what to do with their bodies. And so it's that basic. One does not have.
All right. We've talked about that sort of thing before. This was more to get out of her own mouth who she is. I don't want to have a straw man here. But we've talked about that idea of the government should not interfere. There are different types of moral violations. And there are some of them that I believe the government should not be involved. When my kids lie to me, one of my children lied to me the other night about having had a protein shake. She works out very hard. I said, you need to have a protein shake before you go to bed to help you to rebuild those muscles. She said, I did drink my protein shake. and I'm looking in the kitchen and can tell that nothing has been touched, right? This is lying wrong? Yes. Is it a moral violation? Yes, it is. Is that something I want the government getting involved with? No. On the scale of violation, the victim is me. I have been victimized by my child trying to deceive me about what they have or have not done. It's just a low-level violation for me. It's not a place that requires the intervention of the government. And we could go through adultery. I've talked about this one before. I've said, look, is adultery wrong? I've asked audiences, is lying wrong? They say yes. Don't want the government involved. Is adultery wrong? Almost everybody in the audience, is it morally wrong? All the people in the audience raise their hand, yes. I said, yeah, you're right. Do we want the government involved there? So look, I have family members who have committed adultery on multiple different occasions. Adultery has victims, and the victimization of adultery is much greater than the victimization of just a simple lie. I was a victim of adultery. My father committed adultery on my mother. Because of that, my family broke apart. There are issues that were connected to what my father did to my family that I will deal with till the day that I die. I love my father. I miss him every day. I wish he were still here. But that is a simple, I was a victim of my father's adultery. My family was victimized by my father's adultery. And that victimization was serious. Did I want him to be arrested for that? No. I don't want the government involved in that. But then there's other levels of victimization. A man raping a woman, a child being abused. We have to ask the question, do I want the government involved in those? Do I want the government involved in spousal abuse? I sure do. Why? And when I ask the audience all the time, why? What's the difference? The audience will oftentimes tell me it's the nature of the physical crime, the attack against an innocent victim. An innocent victim is being hurt. An innocent human being is being attacked or hurt in a way that they can't resist, can't fight back, can't stop. It's unjust, and so the government has to step in to punish the morally guilty party or to limit this by making it illegal. Because we just can't have this happening all the time. The nature of the victimization requires interference by the community and the government. So then the question becomes, if abortion is immoral, then what kind of moral crime is it? Is it almost a nothing crime, like lying to me that you drink a protein shake? Is it like adultery? Or does it have more in common with child abuse, spousal abuse, things like that? If the unborn are fully human, then it has much more in common with the third. And so just as we accept the fact that the government must intervene sometimes in the way human beings use their bodies, which even Kamala Harris knows, you can't just absurdly say the government shouldn't be able to tell people what to do with their bodies. We tell people what to do with their bodies all the time. And we're morally justified in doing so when there is a victim or sufficient victimization of another human life. So the question is not, does the government have the right to tell people what they can and can't do with their bodies? We do it all the time. The question is, are the unborn one of us? And is the moral offense of abortion, if the unborn are like us, more like lying, adultery, or child abuse and spousal abuse? I would argue if they are like us, then it has much more in common with the third than the first two. And so the government interfering makes perfect sense. It's nonsense for her to just object on that grounds alone. But we have something now. We have a woman who says there should be no reason that any religious people get involved in this. You're allowed to have your personal held views. But if you believe that other human beings are killing other human beings all around you, you shouldn't feel like the government needs to get involved with this. Ridiculous. What we need to do is have this fight. And I mean in the best sense possible. We need to have an argument about what the unborn are. We need to be able to meet in the public square and discuss how we answer this question and the best way to address it. We don't need to be told that one side doesn't get to interfere at all and the other side gets everything they want, because that's what neutrality is. Neutrality is, and Hadley Arkus talks about this in the book Natural Rights, right, and the Right to Choose. He talks about this faux neutrality, this neutrality that says in order to be neutral, those who think that abortion is wrong can hold their personal views but cannot bring those to the public sector. And those who think abortion is okay have every law crafted to their advantage throughout the world. And that's neutrality. So that's not neutrality. That's faux neutrality. That's just the other side getting everything they want and ignoring the rights claims that the other side is advocating for on behalf of nascent human life, embryonic humans, and fetal humans, unborn human life. So, but that's what she wants. She wants to restore Roe, and she wants religious people to keep their views to themselves. So what does it mean to restore Roe? Right now, as we talked about last week, and we'll revisit again next time, right now, President Trump, or former President Trump, candidate Trump, feels very strongly that this is a states issue, and that's where he's pushing the Republican Party to go. Let them fight it out in the states. That's not what the Democratic Party wants. They want a federal law that restores something like what Roe v. Wade was. But here's the thing. Roe v. Wade said that abortion was legal through all 9 months. Well, Roe v. Wade had trimester systems, Jay. It was legal in the first trimester. It was reasonable to restrict it in the second trimester, and the states are fine restricting it in the third trimester. That's not really what Roe v. Wade said, because of the companion piece that comes out. Doe versus Bolton has the exception, what they call the health exception. And within the health exception, they include not just the life of the mother, but also ideas of emotional health. This overall concept of health and flourishing. And if it can be said that at any over level that they're no longer, their flourishing is threatened or their health is threatened, it can be psychological, emotional. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical. If any of those things are threatened, then she has access to abortion. And all you have to do is find a doctor that's willing to do that. So Roe v. Wade did make it. Now, the response from the other side is often late-term abortion, which they hate that term anyway. They would say abortions later in pregnancy don't happen. They're not common. It's not normal. 90% of abortions happen in the first 12 weeks. I think something like 93 to 95 happen in the first 15 weeks. Abortion is happening very early in pregnancy, particularly as the number of medical abortions or chemical abortions rise. The average of the number of abortions that happen are growing as far as the percentage of them of all. So when we're talking about abortions happening later, after 20 weeks, after 24 weeks of pregnancy, we're not talking about something that's very commonly happening. But after 24 weeks, I think it's still something like 4,000 abortions a year in the United States. But they say that's not common. That's not what we're arguing about. But it is, because you are saying that's fine. So the first thing is to restore Roe v. Wade is to restore, and by the way, and I'll provide article links to this, that's not enough for a lot of the people on her side. They say Roe v. Wade was flawed to begin with because there was language in there that said, and when especially when you get to Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1992, that it's okay to restrict abortion after viability. And the people who loved Roe v. Wade are now saying the restoration of Roe v. Wade isn't enough. We need to get past what they said and what they're offering as far as the kind of language when you talk about focusing on things like viability. There's Abortion Justice Now has got a document up online. You go to www.abortionjusticenow.com if you want to read it. And this represents what that side is seeking as they talk about not the restoration of Roe, but a federal law that goes well beyond Roe. And what they want is any language of limitations removed altogether. It is never legitimate anywhere for the government to interfere with a woman's right to receive an abortion. And they're focusing on viability on this and the other types of restrictions that come up. They say, national relief is needed. A limited protection is functionally a limited right. Roe was not protective for all women. Abortion limits enable pregnancy criminalization. Individuals, families, and communities bear the burden of compromise. Reproductive justice must be a core tenet in policy making. This is all for abortion justice now. Now, I will say this. Abortion justice now makes a good case for why viability is a terrible marker for when you set the idea that abortion should be limited at viability. In states who have viability laws, they make a very compelling case for why that's bad. Now, it's not a new case. It's a case that's been made ometime by people on the pro-life side who have published on academic levels and elsewhere saying viability is a terrible way to determine whether a human life should be protected by the law, primarily because viability is not a biological or substantial nature, something tied into the nature of the life or biologically determined. It's determined by the ability of science, medical science, to intervene on behalf of the unborn. How long can it survive outside the woman is determined by what hospital it's in. If the unborn life is outside, introduced out to the elements outside, if it's in the right hospital, here in Atlanta, we have Northside Hospital, one of the greatest neonatal care facilities in the world. if you have a child born premature in this city and they're born at Northside, you are going to get the kind of care that is going to make it more viable in the sense that it has a better survivability than it will almost anywhere else in the world. And they make the case that, look, viability changes from hospital to hospital, from doctor to doctor. It cannot hold the ground, or cannot be the grounding for when a human life becomes valuable and ought to be protected under law. They're going at it from the other way. They say this is a stupid marker, get rid of it altogether. There should be no restrictions on women getting abortions. By the way, I'm wrong in what I just said. Let me clarify a point, because I have been unfair to them. They never use the term women. They use the terms abortion seekers and pregnant people. So it's pregnant people and abortion seekers. Nowhere do they ever advocate for women and women's rights to get abortions. Pregnant people and abortion seekers ought to be able to get all the abortions that they want. So I apologize. I was unfair. Abortion justice now is not about women. It's about abortion seekers and pregnant people. They're not fighting for women at all. What does it matter? Women aren't the only ones that can get pregnant. Mercy. All right. So, but this is, they say all restrictions are unjust because ultimately they open up the opportunity to criminalize some level of abortion, and everybody should be able to have access to abortion as a basic fundamental human right through all 9 months of pregnancy, even though they reject the idea that those types of later abortions are going to happen. They ought to be free to happen at any point that a woman decides she does not want to have this child. That's abortion justice now, and that's the articulation of the point for the people that are pushing back on this. But and let's take a moment then as we talk about what we're fighting for, what Kamala Harris is fighting for in the restoration of Roe and abortion justice now going beyond the restoration of Roe when we talk about late-term abortions. Now, they give reason. If you I have spent an inordinate amount of time in the last week reading the justifications for abortions post 24 weeks, post 26 weeks, post 30 weeks, this idea of once we get to a point where a more mature life is living inside of that woman, abortion seeker, pregnant person, what justification do they offer for the reasons why they ought to be able to access abortion, even though we're talking about a child that's formed enough at this point that even by David Boonan's organized cortical brain activity standard, it should be able to experience the pain of being killed. So what is their justification at that late in the game? But they say there's two reasons that they offer that people are seeking abortions at that point. One is new information, meaning that there are certain abnormalities and defects that don't express themselves until later in the maturation process of a fetal human being. And when we see some of them, brain defects, particularly, are we talking about more than anything, illnesses, genetic illnesses that would prohibit life from flourishing or seen as there's no way this child will either survive to birth or survive very long after birth, then at that point you should be free to end that pregnancy. And they say for the sake of that child. So they say information comes later. But that's not the main reason. As a matter of fact, even Warren Hearn, an abortionist, and I'm going to post the evidence of this, but even Warren Hearn, late-term abortionist, when he wrote and talked about this, the reasons that women were getting late-term abortions, he said they weren't, or later abortions, he said they weren't any different than the reasons that others were getting. It wasn't people coming to me that were in life-threatening situations, or most often than not, most often than not, they were the same reasons that anybody was getting an abortion. And this comes into where they say the second reason, the second justification, is that circumstances either changed or that there were barriers to their ability to get an abortion earlier that were only changed later. Maybe financial barriers, which is strange because an abortion very early, I think $560 something is the average cost of an abortion based on the data that one of these papers I have in front of me. It said something around high 300s to mid 500s is average when we're talking about medical abortions, the cost of them. When you get into second trimester abortions, or you're talking about 15 to 20 weeks and somewhere in that area, 15 to 24, the numbers go up to high hundreds into the thousands. To get something post 24, 26, just the procedure itself can cost as much as $25,000. So it's curious that people who couldn't afford it when it was $500 now have the ability to pay for it when it's $4,000 to $25,000. And there's only a handful of doctors in the nation that are willing to do it for you. But that is one of the things they claim, that legal or financial barriers made it impossible for them to get access to abortion. So this is important because this goes back to what Warren Hearn says. Charlotte Lozier has an article about this on their website. Multiple different pro-life organizations have articles addressing this on their website. That when people say that the reason they get abortions late in pregnancy is almost entirely because the woman has found herself ill or the child is hopelessly ill, that's just not true. We have this whole category of people who are getting it for the exact same reason as people who are getting it earlier, but there are reasons that they couldn't get it, which they call barriers that were put in place by abortion restrictive societies or cultures. Couldn't afford it, couldn't afford the trip to get it, whatever. But that means that they're not getting abortions later in pregnancy because their life is threatened or their child has a futile life, right? They're getting them for the same reasons anybody else got them. They just came late to the game. And they give a couple of examples in one study that I saw that had a whopping, I think, 28 people participate in it. It was like 28 to 38. I can't remember the numbers. I could get exact, but something like that. I think it was like 28 people that they had to participate in this study that they had done. And 2 of the people didn't know they were pregnant, didn't find out they were pregnant until they were about 25 weeks along. Yeah, I mean, I guess biologically that can happen. I don't want to sit here and argue about somebody who doesn't know they're pregnant until their 25th week. Something odd happened there. And so they're saying, though, that person should be allowed to get an abortion because they missed their window because they didn't realize they were pregnant. If they only realized they were pregnant, they would have killed their child long ago. But now finding out late in the game, they should be allowed to do it, even though the child has developed to the point that they will experience the violent death of abortion as painful. They should still be able to get that abortion because it's not their fault they didn't know they were pregnant. Not because there's anything wrong with the life, not because there's anything wrong with them. They just would have killed it earlier had they only known they could have and that they needed to. And these are the reasons that are given. This is their own words. This is what they're saying. I'm quoting what they're saying. So now they make it sound better than it is, but ultimately that's what you're saying. When you say that new information came as it pertains to the unborn life, that's saying that the life itself demonstrated that there was something about it that you didn't want it. More often than not, that's Down syndrome. If you're saying that your circumstances changed or that there were barriers to you getting it earlier, you're saying there was nothing wrong with the child and nothing wrong with you. You just decided to get your abortion later. And Warren Hearn, an abortionist who provided abortions up to that point without any moral qualms, said that was more often than not what he was dealing with. So we're not talking about and advocating for late-term abortions, just this level of empathy to understand women who are going through these terrible things. By the way, there's a reason why life of the mother is a terrible reason to get an abortion. If you're talking about somebody whose pregnancy is advanced to a certain stage, and you say, well, her life is threatened by that pregnancy. My wife's, for our first pregnancy, was an emergency C-section. Actually, it was called an urgent C-section. She had high blood pressure, some level of issues that were going on that were dangerous for her. It was going to be possible to control birth. So do you know what they did? A C-section. Why? Because the doctor told me, if it gets bad enough, I can have your son out of her in 90 seconds. And then I can treat her and I can treat him as separate patients. If you went in for an emergency abortion at that point, they would have to jam something inside of you like laminaria into your cervix and send you home for 2 days while that worked to dilate your cervix enough so that they could perform the abortion at all. Which one of these is more likely to produce life-saving results for someone who's in an emergency situation? I can have it out in 90 seconds and be able to treat you so that the pregnancy is no longer impacting your health. Come back in 2 to 3 days and we'll do what we can for you. I think the first is actually better emergency and urgent care than the second. It's absurd to say that those situations require that. But let's get to, so for the most part, what we're talking about is new information that came as a result to the health of the child, or circumstances changed, oftentimes because there were, by their definition, barriers to women being able to get abortion earlier. These abortions oftentimes are not because there was anything wrong with the child or there was anything wrong with the mother. It was because they just couldn't get it when they wanted to, and now they have to find a doctor that they're willing to pay a whole lot more money to do what they would have done earlier if they could have. And there are people that argue as well that this is pressure from the man who got them pregnant that can change those. When they say circumstances change, it could be pressure from somebody who is involved on the outside of this as well, who is willing to pay for the extra funds to get this done. So that's what they're advocating for, late-term abortion. I want to ask this now when we're talking about late-term abortion, because this is what Kamala Harris is going to make this election about if she can. She's already said that. They've put it in the platform. Her supporters want more than she's advocating for, but she supports this. By supporting Roe v. Wade, she already supports this idea of abortion all the way through, federally protected as a right. What does the rest of the world do? If I have heard for years, anytime during the Roe v. Wade control over law in the United States, anytime a state would try to restrict the practice of abortion, we were told that they were abortion extremists. Extremists. You're an extremist. You want to tell women what they can and can't do. And abortion justice now is saying no limits ever. No gestational limits. Nothing should ever be allowed. Women should have right to get an abortion all the way through because it's a matter of control of their body. So are we the extremists? Former president, possibly future president, who knows, Donald Trump, he has said, I would like a 16-week ban. Pro-lifers aren't happy with that. He said, I want a federal 16-week ban. Pro-lifers aren't happy with that because they say almost all abortions are performed before that point. The other side's not happy with it because they say any compromise on any level just leads to more restriction. That's the way they see it. They're absolutists. By the way, we have absolutists on the pro-life side that say the exact opposite. Any compromise with them on setting limits as opposed to getting rid of all abortion only leads to more access to abortion. So the people on both sides that are absolutists see any compromise as only giving ground to the other side. But former President Trump says he wants a 16-week ban federally mandated. And they say that's extremist. Ireland, 12 weeks. Italy, 12 weeks. France, 14 weeks. Finland, 12 weeks. Estonia, 12 weeks. Denmark, 12 weeks. Great Britain goes farther than almost anybody. I think they go up to like 22, 24 weeks of their viability. Right? Spain, 14 weeks. Sweden, 18 weeks. Switzerland, 12 weeks. Scotland, not applicable. Northern Ireland, 12 weeks. Who's the extremist? Who's the extremist in this? The people who say restrictions are reasonable. And every one of those, by the way, there were reasons that you could. Prevention of serious physical, Switzerland, 12 weeks, unless you're talking about prevention of serious physical harm, prevention of serious psychological harm. That's an interesting one. Portugal, 10 weeks. At any stage, if it's an unviable unborn child, danger to the life of a pregnant woman, serious and lasting danger, physical, mental health of the pregnant woman, danger to the life of pregnant woman up to 12 weeks, serious and lasting danger, pregnancy as a result of sexual violence up to 16 weeks. So you see these places where they say, well, we'll let you go up to this point if there are serious risks involved, and they outline those risks. So who is the extremist? All of those countries. In Germany, by the way, I was talking to philosopher Richard Stith, and he said, look, Germany says abortion is wrong. It's bad, but we're going to allow it for the first 12 weeks. But we as a country think it's a bad thing. It's wrong, and it ought not to be a thing. All of these countries who have limitations, and then exceptions to those limitations, usually defined by serious health issues, clearly defined issues, but limitations under the law, or the people that say there should never be any limitations anywhere ever at all. They should be able to get them all the way through pregnancy, which they don't think is going to happen, but it should be allowed to happen. I would say the person representing the extreme view is the latter, Abortion Justice Now, and candidate and Vice President Kamala Harris. This is what they want to campaign on. But we have to be clear about what they're asking for. They are asking for an environment that is rejected by almost every country in the world as too extreme on the position of abortion. Now, they claim abortion is liberalizing all over the world, except they list 5 countries where it's not liberalizing and it's pushed back. The United States being one of those, Poland being one of those. So they say, look, there's countries that are pushing back and they're starting to pull back, but everywhere else it's liberalizing. But then that means that even though in general the wave is liberalization, it is not universally true that the world is liberalizing on abortion laws. There are people that are looking at their abortion laws and saying, we think this got out of hand. Let's pull it back a little bit. Let's control this. And I know this is going to make you crazy, tell women that there are reasonable limits about what they're allowed to do to their unborn children. And that we as a culture reject the idea that the government never has a thing to say to a woman about what she can or can't do with her body when it comes to victimizing her unborn child. There are moral justifications for the government getting involved. They are advocating for a way of life that most of the country rejects. Now, most people are betting on the idea, by the way, and this is something that you see. The Democratic Party is betting on the idea that because of this swing, that we see this emotional swing due to Dobbs versus Jackson, the country is liberalizing its view on later abortions. They're starting to feel more comfortable with what it means to be able to let I hope that's not true. I have rejected reading Gonzalez versus Carhart on this show because I don't want people to be subjected to hearing that aren't prepared to hear it. I think I'm going to do it on the next show. I think the next show we're going to talk about that. I think I'm going to do a deep dive into the question, is the culture getting more comfortable with late-term abortion? And I want to talk about what that means. Because you don't hug them to death. They're not kissed to death. They're brutally destroyed when they're older. And the best possible scenario is that the person performing the abortion took the merciful step of making sure they killed the child before they tore them to pieces. That's our best possible scenario, but not universally done. So as they're saying the world may be getting more comfortable with it, then it becomes the responsibility of those people who disagree with abortion, like me, and believe that abortion is evil and that it ought to be fought, to educate people on what it is they're growing more comfortable with. And this would be exactly why organizations like Created Equal, like the Genocide Awareness Project and the GAP projects that are brought by the Center for Bioethical Reform to college campuses, Life Training Institute, and Scott Klusendorf. This is exactly why those organizations show abortion victim photography and abortion victim images and abortion victim videos. Because as we hear the claim that the world is getting more comfortable with the idea of destroying fetal human life later in its development, then it's the duty and responsibility of those who are against that to make the world see exactly what it is that they're becoming more comfortable with. So that, in a nutshell, is where we are with Vice President Kamala Harris's position on abortion and what the people who are supporting her want beyond what she desires, with hopefully some explanation about what it means when we're talking about being reasonable in pursuing late-term abortions, the reasons that people get late-term abortions, and the idea that we are extremists for wanting to restrict the practice of abortion, or that the government should never have anything to say to a woman about when she can or can't get an abortion. Now, I know, by the way, that Abortion Justice Now thinks every one of those international laws that I read to you are unjust, and that women in every country ought to be able to have an abortion at any stage of the development of the fetal human being, without regards to what it means to that life. But it does at least help us to understand that it's their position that is the outlier, not the idea that restricting abortion can be wrong or can be the right thing to do. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Merely Human Ministries Human Things podcast. We're coming to the end of season 3. Only 2 more episodes as far as I think. And we can do as many as we want. I mean, we can just keep going. But if you enjoy this content, please support us at merelyhumanministries.org. Look for us on YouTube. YouTube shorts are up from this video. Look for these videos on YouTube. Look for us on SoundCloud, Apple, and look for us on Facebook. And one more housekeeping thing. We have started a Substack. Look for me at J Watts on Substack. I am putting my series on blogging through the Bible with an emphasis on what it means for human life and the dignity of human life on there. And I will be doing, in addition to that, a weekly post on something more contemporary so that we're keeping up with what's going on in the world around us. Thank you for joining us and have a great day.